are listening to the 10 Questions ESL podcast. This is the podcast for people around the world who want to improve their listening comprehension. I'm Nancy Buswell, and I've been helping students improve their English for over 16 years. I'm so glad that you are listening, and now let's start the interview. Hi, this is Nancy in Nanning, China, and you are listening to the 10 Questions ESL podcast. We are here today with Gerry Parenti. Gerry is my neighbor. He's a good neighbor, too. And he is 42 years old and is from Canada. Welcome to our podcast, Gerry.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
First of all, can you tell us about your name? You know, I didn't know you spelled your name with a G until I saw your email address.
Sure, my name is with a G because Gerry is not my birth name, I'll call it. It's not the name that appears on my birth certificate. My actual name is Geraldo.
Geraldo.
Geraldo would be the Italian pronunciation. And ever since I can remember, everyone has called me Gerry. There's no one in the world that calls me Geraldo.
Not even your mother or grandmother?
No one calls me. Some people like to play around with it, but I just prefer Gerry because only Italians know how to pronounce the Geraldo properly. Canadians will say Geraldo, sometimes Geraldo, because there was a talk show years ago.
Yeah, Spanish. In Spanish, it's Geraldo.
And Geraldo would be the Spanish pronunciation. Yeah.
Okay, so why are you talking about Italian? I thought you were Canadian.
My father is Italian. He's purebred Italian. He was born in Italy. And through him, I also have my Italian citizenship.
Citizenship?
I went through the procedures in 2004. Took 6 months. I needed certain specific documents, and I received my Italian citizenship and passport over 10 years ago. So I have two citizenships, Italian and Canadian.
Anything else you want to tell us about your name?
Not really. Something of interest. The last name, North Americans will usually pronounce it Parenti, but the Italian pronunciation is Parenti, and it's a word. It means my family, my relatives.
Wow.
If I say I miei parenti, which is Italian, I'm saying my family, my relatives. It's unusual because most Westerners, their names don't mean anything.
Right.
But in this case, my last name is an actual Italian word.
Okay.
Just coincidence, just fluke. I think.
Yep. So, Gerry, are you a student or are you working?
I am officially working. Here I'm working as an English teacher. I started working at the age of about 16, and since 16 and now, I figure I've had about 20 different jobs.
20.
So right now, I'm a teacher, and I say officially, and I also like to say I am unofficially a student, because I still enjoy learning many things. At the present moment, I have decided to try and learn the Chinese language. So I'm a student of the Chinese language, but besides that, I also enjoy learning about the earth, the universe, exercise, nutrition, cooking and baking, and I'm also an unofficial teacher of others. There's a young fellow at the gym I go to, and I am unofficially teaching him exercise stuff. Because he's a trainer, and I kind of made an unwritten deal with him that I would teach him stuff, and then he would teach his colleagues stuff. Because he's the only one there that speaks English, so I can't communicate with the other Chinese staff. And I have been a student of exercise for over 3 decades. So I have a lot of information that I'd like to share. And one way to do it is by teaching others.
Great. So the teacher is also a student. Now, what do you teach?
At the present moment, I'm teaching English, specifically speaking and listening.
Okay. Gerry, tell us about where you come from.
I am Canadian born in the city of Montreal, which is in the province of Quebec. which is one of the provinces of Canada, closer to the Atlantic Ocean than the Pacific Ocean.
Montreal.
Yeah,
I thought only French-speaking people lived there. I don't know a lot about Canada.
Quebec is a French-speaking province. Canada itself has two official languages, English and French. Most of Canada speaks English. Quebec is a province that is predominantly French-speaking, but many people in that province will also be bilingual and speak English. There's another small area of Canada that's concentrated with French people, and that's on the East Coast. But most of the rest of Canada, it's English, it's spoken English. Okay. So that's where I'm from. But when I was about 6 months old, my family moved away from Canada. Oh. And we didn't return until I was about 8 years old. In the interim, something interesting is I lived in 5 countries. From Montreal, we went to Spain, specifically Las Palmas, which is one of the Canary Islands. Okay. Then we went to England. Then we went to Greece. Then Italy. Then Venezuela. Oh my. And then finally my mom decided that she wanted her children to grow up in Canada. So when I was about 8 and a half, we left Venezuela in December, which is near the equator, so a very hot country, and we arrived in Moncton, New Brunswick, with about 6 feet of snow.
6 feet, that's almost 2 meters, isn't it?
So 6 feet would be, roughly
2 meters of snow.
2 meters of snow. That's the first time we had experienced a winter like that. So Canadian born is the quick answer to that question.
But you've lived other places.
Yes.
How many people are in your family?
In my family, in my immediate family, which I believe is also called the nuclear family, there's my father, my mother, and I have an older brother and an older sister. Getting away from the nuclear family, what might be known as the extended family, I also have 3 stepbrothers. They all live on the west coast of Canada. Each of those 3 are married, and they each have children. So through my stepbrothers, I have 8 nieces and nephews. And my brother has 3 daughters, so I have 3 nieces. And my sister has 2 children, a son and a daughter, so a niece and a nephew with her.
That's a lot, yeah. What are your favorite foods?
To characterize my favorite food, I would say Italian food is my favorite. I enjoy any kind of pasta. Lasagna is my favorite. I was recently living in Italy for 6 years, and lasagna was my favorite. Besides that, I also enjoy a barbecue. What I would characterize as a North American barbecue. Because in Italy they do barbecues, but it's different. North Americans, I'm not sure if we're better, but we do things differently, which I find more palatable and more enjoyable to eat.
So to me, barbecue has 2 meanings. One is to cook over a fire, and one is like the Texas or the Southern barbecue that has a sauce on it.
What I'm speaking about is basically that the barbecue sauce that goes on it, and sometimes the meat is prepared before it actually goes on the barbecue. For example, a slow cooked rib would be first boiled in water, sometimes actually also even Coca-Cola. It's boiled in that on a slow heat for anywhere from an hour to 2. And then it goes from that onto the grill of the barbecue. And then if you're lucky, someone will put some barbecue sauce on that. It just makes it more enjoyable. When I was in Italy, many times the meat would go directly onto the grill, right, which then just makes it chewy. And it takes a long time to eat a rib that hasn't been prepared beforehand.
What are your favorite forms of entertainment?
Favorite forms of entertainment would be, and this depends also on where I am. Right now, most of my entertainment is watching TV shows, watching movies, and I also watch documentaries. Part of being a student, an unofficial student, means watching documentaries so I can learn about other things. I watch a lot of documentaries on the universe, on exercise, etc., etc. Other forms of entertainment would be, I've gone out a few times since arriving here in China 5 months ago, just with some friends to a bar, I'll call it, where we have a few drinks, and there's some games that are usually played. And entertainment, which might also be considered hobbies, I enjoy cooking and baking, and I also enjoy gardening and landscaping. That, to me, as far as definition of entertainment, is something you enjoy doing. Okay. But a hobby, it can also be very similar with the definition.
Right, yeah, definitions, I don't know, sometimes I say things that you're interested in. And hobbies, I don't know, it's hard to tell the difference sometimes, have to look at the dictionary. Yeah. Let me go on to question number 7. Do you have any favorite sports?
I do. I'll say my favorite sport would be swimming. Mm-hmm. When I was younger, for about 15 years, I was a competitive swimmer.
You're actually wearing a T-shirt that says swimming. Oh, natation. Is that the French word?
It's French. It's Swimming Natation Canada. Which happens to be one of my brother's Team Canada T-shirts that he got 2 decades ago.
You told me your brother was a good swimmer, too.
He was a 2-time Olympian. So it kind of went in the family. When we were younger, living in Venezuela, my mom started us with a swim club. So after school, we would go to this big club, and we would do 1 day of swimming, 1 day of diving. So we started very young, about 7 years old. And once we moved to Canada, we continued. He had a lot more success than I did. He received a scholarship to an American university and did go on to compete for Canada at 2 Olympic Games.
Wow.
I did well myself, looking back on it, but I did not reach that pinnacle of sport, which would be participating for your country at the Olympic Games.
Right.
So that would be my favorite sport, but I also enjoy many other sports. Luckily, as I mentioned, my brother, we're very close in age, so we always had someone to play with when we were younger. So we were able to improve our skills in many sports that you need someone else to play with. For example, racket sports. We did a lot of racket stuff, and just the benefit of having a brother so close in age, we were able to play all these sports together as children.
Yeah, good. What is your favorite holiday?
My favorite holiday, I don't have a specific favorite holiday. What I enjoy most about holidays is families getting together. Recently, as I mentioned, I was living in Italy. In Italy, there are a lot of people in my family. I would say close to about 40 people within about a 15-kilometer radius.
Wow.
So that there were lots of opportunities to have big family dinners. The biggest ones in Italy are Christmas and Easter. So for those 2 holidays, there would usually be a large gathering of family. In North America, there's also another common holiday called Thanksgiving, in which we would usually get together with whoever is close enough to get together. If your listeners aren't familiar, American Thanksgiving happens in November, whilst Canadian Thanksgiving happens in October. And the reason I believe is because the harvest season is shorter in Canada, because winter arrives sooner, because Canada is farther north than America.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Let's see. Can you tell us about an interesting place you have been to or an interesting thing you have seen?
Yeah, thinking about that question, I've mentioned Italy numerous times already in this interview, so I'd like to describe where I had the fortune of living for 6 years, having left only this March, which would be about 5 months ago. I was living in Tuscany, which is a large area in Italy. And the specific place I was living in was between Pisa, the city of Pisa, and another smaller city known as Lucca. Many people are familiar with Pisa because there's a famous leaning tower.
Right.
It was about a 20-minute drive from where I was living to visit this Leaning Tower of Pisa. Now, where I was living, it's owned by my uncle, who bought the property about 30 years ago. And on this property, it's a large property, about 25,000 square meters, which roughly translates to, I think, 7 acres. Now, a lot of this property is not livable. Behind the house, there's a mountain and a forest. So that area, law will not allow any kind of development. So it has to stay as it is. But the rest of the property, there's a large yard, front yard, backyard, which Britain people might call a garden. So there's a front garden and a back garden. And on the side of the house, there's also an olive grove, which has about 65 olive trees.
That's on your property.
On my uncle's property.
Yeah.
He owns these 65 trees. He planted them, I think, about 15 years ago. And every season, at the end of the season, which is either end of October, early November, we would harvest the olives, bring the olives to the mill, and have our own fresh squeezed olive oil. Yeah.
Wow.
Apart from that, there are about 15 other fruit trees on the property. Fig, plum, apricot, cherry, apple, pear, and I might be forgetting some, but anyways, about 15 other fruit trees.
Wow.
And it was just a beautiful property out in the countryside. The air was clean. I had a beautiful scenery of the village. So it was a very enjoyable time for me. Yeah, I look forward to going back.
Sounds real nice. Tuscany is supposed to be a really, really lovely area, isn't it?
Well, whenever you tell someone I was in Italy, I was in Tuscany, they always say, wow, you're so lucky. You're so fortunate. And I was. And thankfully, during the time I was there, I realized how fortunate I was, which just made it all the more enjoyable.
I've never been to Italy, but I'd certainly like to go sometime. Yeah. So, is there anything else you want to tell us?
No, not really. What I might choose to say is I am a Canadian born, but I don't think my accent is from a typical Canadian. What I have learned, about 10 years ago, I started being an English teacher, so I learned how to make my speech clearer, cleaner, and slower. So for your listeners, unfortunately, even though you can understand almost everything I say, I am not a typical Canadian speaker. Many native English speakers, they're not going to pronounce the complete word.
Right.
So just the reason I do this is because I believe it's easier for my students, and I also believe it gives them confidence that they can understand everything I'm saying, which is why I speak this way. If I'm speaking to, for example, my best friend of 30 years, I can change the words I use. I can change the way I speak because we know each other so well.
Right.
Even if he doesn't understand one of my words, he'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Those are some good points, Gerry.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you very much for the time you've given us, and thank you for being on the 10 Questions ESL podcast.
You're very welcome. I hope this was enjoyable for your listeners, and thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to the 10 Questions ESL podcast. To get a transcript of the interview, cultural notes, vocabulary, and discussion questions, please go to my website at missbuswell.com. That's MISSBUSWELL.com. Join my email list, and I'll send you an ebook or PDF to help you learn even more from this podcast. You can work alone, with your classmates or friends, or tell your English teacher about it and he or she can use it in class. This is Nancy Buswell. I'll be back soon with a new podcast. Until then, keep asking questions.